I think.
Have you received threats on your life?
Oh, yes.
That what Malcolm X said when he got silenced by Elijah Muhammad was in fact true. America's chickens are coming home to roost. We took this country by terror away from the Sioux, the Apache, the Arawak, the Comanche, the Arapaho, the Navajo. Terrorism. We took Africans from their country to build our way of ease and kept them enslaved and living in fear. Terrorism. We bombed Grenada and killed innocent civilians, babies, non-military personnel. We bombed the black civilian community of Panama with stealth bombers and killed unarmed teenagers and toddlers, pregnant mothers and hard-working fathers. We bombed Gaddafi's home and killed his child. Blessed are they who bash your children's head against a rock. We bombed Iraq. We killed unarmed civilians trying to make a living. We bombed a plant in Sudan to pay back for the attack on our embassy. Killed hundreds of hard-working people, mothers and fathers who left home to go that day not knowing that they never get back home. We bombed Hiroshima. We bombed Nagasaki. And we nuked far more than the thousands in New York and the Pentagon. And we never batted an eye. Kids playing in the playground, mothers picking up children after school, civilians, not soldiers, people just trying to make it day by day. We have supported state terrorism against the Palestinians and black South Africans, and now we are indignant because the stuff we have done overseas is now brought right back into our own front yards. America's chickens are coming home to roost. Violence begets violence. Hatred begets hatred. And terrorism begets terrorism. A white ambassador said that, y'all, not a black militant.
Have you received threats on your life?
Oh, yes.
Nobody can give you freedom. Nobody can give you freedom. Nobody can give you equality, justice, anything. If you're a man, you take it. Power in defense of freedom is greater than power on behalf of tyranny and oppression. Because power, real power, comes from our conviction, which produces action, uncompromising action. And power doesn't back up in the face of a smile or in the face of a threat of some kind of non-violent, loving action. It's not the nature of power to back up in the face of anything but some more power. Be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. But if a man puts his hand on you, send him to the cemetery.
Are you not, perhaps, afraid of what might happen to you as a result of making these revelations?
Oh, yes. I probably am a dead man already.
All 5 of Malcolm X's assassins came from the Masjid Ali Muslim Mosque, which was the Nation of Islam Mosque number 25. It's located at 257 South Orange Avenue. And this is according to Talmadge Hayer. Talmadge Hayer is the one Malcolm X assassin who was captured by the crowd. He was beaten, taken into custody by the police, tried and sentenced to 20 years, 20 to life in prison. Here's Talmadge Hayer here admitting to shooting Malcolm X.
At the trial, you pleaded guilty. You said that you were one of the persons involved in the assassination. This is correct.
William Willie X. Bradley, also known as the Stick-Up Man, he's a bank robber. He's the one that shot Malcolm X with the shotgun blast, the first shot, which was the kill shot. And then Leon X. Davis and Talmadge Hayer got up and emptied their handguns into Malcolm's body. Wilbur McKinley is the one who yells out, "Get your hands out of my pocket," as a distraction for Willie Bradley, Talmadge Hayer, and Leon X. Davis to assassinate Malcolm X. Albert Benjamin Thomas was involved in the distraction too. So that's the 5 assassins. You have Albert Benjamin Thomas, Wilbur McKinley, both of them who were involved in the distraction. And then you had William Willie X. Bradley, who was the one that went up and shot Malcolm X with a shotgun blast, which turned out to be the kill shot. And then you had Leon X. Davis and Talmadge Hayer, who went up and emptied their guns into Malcolm X. Talmadge Hayer is also known as Thomas Hagen, and he's also known as Mujahid Abdul Halim. So all of these guys actually have lots of different names, but ultimately the main killer, the man who murdered Malcolm X, William Bradley, was never arrested, nor tried, nor convicted, and William Bradley still walks around amongst us today in Newark, driving a Mercedes-Benz, living in a gated community. William Bradley was living in Newark, New Jersey in 2011 under the name Al Mustafa Shabazz. So William Bradley is now known as Al Mustafa Shabazz, and he was spotted in Newark in 2015. So here's a picture of William Bradley, aka Mustafa Shabazz. He's got a white beard, he's fat, he's out in the open, and he was also caught in a commercial, or he was in a commercial for Cory Booker, very much poignantly shaking hands with the police officer. And some folks think that the FBI or the New York police was involved in Malcolm X's murder. Maybe all these guys were involved in it. So it's, you know, you have a murderer. He killed Malcolm X, and he's still free.
In 1965, the assassins of Malcolm X all came out of Newark, New Jersey's Mosque number 25. They were Fruit of Islam members, Albert Benjamin Thomas, Leon Davis, Wilbur McKinley, William Bradley, and Thomas Hayer. Crime has plagued Newark, New Jersey for quite some time.
Making progress. We are making Newark safer and stronger. And together, Newark, we are taking back our city.
In the beginning of this commercial, a police officer can be seen shaking the hand of a man who appears to be a Muslim. There, the man dressed in brown with the white beard. The man that you see shaking the police officer's hand is today known as Mustafa Shabazz. In 1965, he was Nation of Islam member William Bradley.
You show me a capitalist, and I'll show you a bloodsucker.
Bradley was the assassin who fired the double-barrel sawed-off shotgun that took Malcolm X's life.
History is a people's memory, and without a memory, humankind is demoted to the lower animals.
The only thing that I regret in all of this is that two black groups have to fight and kill each other off. Elijah Muhammad could stop the whole thing tomorrow just by raising his hand. Really, he could. He could stop the whole thing by raising his hand. But he won't. He doesn't love black people. He doesn't even love his own followers. Proof of which they're killing each other. They killed one in the Bronx. They shot another one in the Bronx. They tried to get 6 of us Sunday morning. And the pattern has developed across the country. The man has gone insane. Absolutely out of his mind. Besides, you can't be 70 years old and surround yourself by a handful of 16, 17, 18-year-old girls and keep your right mind. You can't do it.
At 2:55 p.m., the MMI's security detail made its third and final change of assignments. A few minutes before 3 p.m., without advance warning, Malcolm walked briskly out onto the stage with a portfolio in his hand and sat down next to Benjamin 2X, Without further ado, I bring before you Minister Malcolm, Benjamin hastily announced. As the applause began, Benjamin dutifully turned from the speaker's platform and moved to sit down on the stage, but Malcolm stopped him from sitting down and, leaning over slightly, asked him to look out for Galamissen's arrival. Since Galamissen had canceled his appearance, the order made no sense, but Benjamin 2X obediently left the stage and Malcolm walked up to the podium. History proves that the white man is a devil. The enthusiastic applause lasted almost a full minute as Malcolm surveyed his admiring audience. To his immediate left, bodyguard Gene X. Roberts quietly left box 2 and walked swiftly to the rear of the ballroom, only a few feet from Reuben X. Francis. By doing so, whether by coincidence or design, he would escape being near the primary line of fire that ensued seconds later. Assalamu alaikum, Malcolm declared in Arabic, extending the traditional Muslim words of greeting. Wa alaikum salam, hundreds in the audience responded. Before he could utter another sentence, a disruption broke out in the front and center of the ballroom, approximately 6 or 7 rows from the stage. Get your hands out of my pocket, Wilbur McKinley exclaimed to another conspirator seated next to him. As both pretended to tussle, the pushing and shoving distracted the entire audience, including the MMI security team. From the rostrum, Malcolm shouted repeatedly, "Hold it! Hold it! Hold it! Hold it!" The principal rostrum guards that afternoon were Charles X. Blackwell and Robert 35X Smith. Unusual choices, as they did not usually served in this role and had little experience guarding Malcolm. William 64X George had guarded Malcolm at the rostrum many times, yet on this day he had been stationed outside. When the commotion broke out, Blackwell and Smith made a tactical blunder. They moved from their post and began walking toward the two bickering men. Gene Roberts, George Whitney, and several other security personnel approached the men from the rear. Malcolm was now completely alone and unguarded on stage. At that precise moment, an incendiary smoke bomb ignited at the extreme rear of the ballroom, instantly creating panic, screams, and confusion. It was only then that William Bradley, sitting in the front row, got to his feet and walked briskly toward the rostrum. When he was 15 feet away, he elevated his sawed-off shotgun from under his coat, took careful aim, and fired. The shotgun pellets ripped squarely into Malcolm's left side, cutting a 7-inch wide circle around his heart and left chest. This was the kill shot, the blow that executed Malcolm X. The other bullets caused terrible damage, but were not decisive. This single shotgun blast oddly failed to topple Malcolm. As Herman Ferguson recalled, there was a loud blast, a boom that filled the auditorium with the sound of a weapon going off. On cue, two men, Hayer in the first row with a .45 next to his stomach and Leon X. Davis sitting next to him, also holding a handgun, stood up, ran to the stage, and emptied their guns into Malcolm. Ferguson, still sitting only feet from the stage, took in everything that happened next. Malcolm straightened up momentarily. His hand came up and he stiffened. The shotgun blast had been fired at him by one of the assassins who fired from the crook of his elbow. He hit Malcolm point blank in his left chest. Then a fusillade of shots rang out. This kept up for several seconds. And I remember saying if they would just stop firing, maybe he could survive. And when they did, Malcolm toppled over backwards and the back of his head hit the floor with a crash. Ferguson was perhaps the only eyewitness who had not fallen to the floor to escape the line of fire. He continued his account. After so much noise, shooting, and so on, and the screaming of the people, there was a sudden silence. I could see all the chairs and the people lying on the floor. There were 3 men standing in the center aisle facing the door, and one of them appeared to have some sort of weapon in his hand. They were standing in a row, one behind the other, and they stood frozen in time and space for another few seconds, and then they took off running and hopping over chairs and people's bodies. Being an old farm boy myself, chickens coming home to roost never did make me sad. They've always made me glad. Several eyewitness accounts suggest that Bradley then pivoted to his left and may have fired a second blast above the heads of the audience, narrowly missing Ferguson. He ran down the right corridor of the ballroom and quickly ducked into the women's lavatory, located barely 60 feet from the stage. Discarding his shotgun, he and perhaps a second conspirator descended a narrow, seldom used flight of stairs leading down to the street, making an easy escape. The other two gunmen, Hayer and Leon X. Davis, inexplicably chose to run a virtual gauntlet, leaping over chairs and people, attempted to escape through the ballroom's main entrance on West 166th Street, 180 feet away. Adding to the confusion, the homemade incendiary device composed of a bunch of matches and film stuffed into a sock was still smoking up the ballroom. The two shooters trying to escape through the main entrance hoped to conceal themselves within the large panicking audience, but even before they were halfway across the ballroom, Gene Roberts intercepted them. One assailant, probably Hayer, fired at him at point-blank range. The bullet tore through Roberts' coat, but did not hit him. Roberts grabbed a folding chair and hurled it at Hayer's legs, causing him to stumble and fall, after which Hayer tried to scramble up toward the now-packed exit. As he did so, Reuben X. Francis took aim and fired at him from 8 feet away, pulling off 3 shots. Hayer was struck just once in the left thigh in pain. He stumbled and continued running down the stairwell, where he was immediately surrounded by Malcolm's enraged followers and viciously beaten. In the confusion, Leon X. and the other conspirators managed to escape. Now, this Malcolm X was murdered in front of his wife, and I don't know if all 6 girls were there, but his children, in front of his wife and kids. So Betty would claim that she had seen her husband collapse on stage under the fire. Observers, however, saw her quickly gathering her terrified children, pushing them to the floor, shielded partially by a wooden bench in her own body. As the shooting continued, Betty screamed out, "They're killing my husband! They're killing my husband!" While the assassins fled the scene, the Shabazz children began to cry and to speak up. "Are they going to kill everyone?" one daughter asked. Betty could see people running up to the stage, overwhelmed by the terrible damage that Malcolm had sustained. Gene Roberts is the one that's given him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Gene Roberts is also, he's an undercover. He's one of the authorities. And Malcolm actually talked about that. The Nation of Islam was thoroughly infiltrated by the police.
Gone through that window, it would have fallen on a 6-year-old girl, a 4-year-old girl, and a 2-year-old girl. And I'm going to tell you, if it had done it, I'd taken my rifle and gone after anybody in sight. I would not wait. The police know the criminal operation of the black Muslim movement because they have thoroughly infiltrated it.
Of Negroes getting out of line. As long as they thought that Martin Luther King had things under control in Birmingham, Kennedy didn't see fit to send any troops down there. As long as the dogs were biting little black babies and black women and black children, Kennedy never thought of sending any troops into Birmingham. It was only after the Negroes showed that they were fed up.
White America is in the minority. So all of this comes out of Marable Manning's book, A Transcendent Life, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. And Marable Manning was a professor, and he worked on this for about 20 years. This book is his magnum opus. He intended this to become the official narrative of what happened in Malcolm X's life. And the reason why he wrote this was because there's 3 missing chapters in this book. And this book is a tour de force. This book was published like almost immediately after Malcolm was assassinated. This book awakened me. This book is a badass book. And but there's 3 chapters that was missing, and it was sort of, I guess, not as comprehensive as this book. So Marable Manning wanted to, establish the official narrative of Malcolm X. This is where all this information that I'm getting came from. Now, the Nation of Islam had planned this murder to the hilt. Okay, 1 week prior to February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X's house was firebombed. Stumbling is not falling.
You mean he was going to kill you?
Oh, yes. One of them was, an attempt was made to get one of them to wire my car with an explosive. That one is with me right now. I wanted you to know that my house was bombed. It was bombed by the black Muslim movement upon the orders of Elijah Muhammad. Now, they had planned to do it from the front and the back so that I couldn't get out. They covered the front completely, the front door. Then they had come to the back, but instead of getting directly in the back of the house and throwing it this way, they stood at a 45-degree angle and tossed it at the window, so it glanced and went onto the ground. And the fire hit the window, and it woke up my second oldest baby. But the fire burned on the outside of the house. But had that one gone through that window, it would have fallen on a 6-year-old girl, a 4-year-old girl, and a 2-year-old girl. And I'm going to tell you, if it had done it, I'd taken my rifle and gone after anybody in sight. I would not wait. And I say that because of this. The police know the criminal operation of the black Muslim movement because they have thoroughly infiltrated it.
Truth is on the side of the oppressed. You don't have to be a man to fight for freedom. All you have to do is to be an intelligent human being.
The Muslims claim that you bombed your own house.
That's what I said. The Muslims claim I bombed my house.
Well, because they say it's rightfully there.
Yeah. No, well, you can take what you want. The arson squad, the fire marshal, all of them are experts in this kind of thing. And if anybody can find where I bombed my house, they can put a rifle bullet through my head. It was my children and my own life and my wife's life that was at stake. In fact, let me tell you something, sir. I stood Sunday morning.
Also, that same day, 1 week prior to February 21st, 1965, they firebombed his house, and they also did a walkthrough through the Audubon Ballroom in Washington Heights, New York, which is where he is going to be assassinated. So this is 52 years ago. Malcolm X, a.k.a. Detroit Red, a.k.a. the Great Black Shining Prince, was assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom in Washington Heights, New York. So he was 39 years of age. He was prepared to address the Organization of Afro-American Unity in Manhattan's Audubon Ballroom. Now, Malcolm X was born May 19th, 1925, so he would have been 92 years old today. But instead, 52 years ago, when he was 39 years old, Malcolm X was assassinated because of Elijah Muhammad.
He preached the doom of the white man, as I have been preaching and still preaching. He preached that the white man was the devil. Then when he went out for himself, losing the guidance of Allah, the light of Allah, he went back then and fell on their side.
Now, Malcolm X was killed with a sawed-off J.C. Higgins shotgun by William Bradley, who was never arrested, never punished, never had any consequences whatsoever for his murder, for his assassination. The government also dropped the ball on this because why are all these loose ends just kind of dangling out here? More on that in a second. The entire assassination took about 15 seconds. There was, get your hands out of my pocket. Then there was a smoke bomb in the back, which was like a sock filled with matches and film. Just film. So I don't know if it was like camera film or movie film, but just film and matches and a sock. And they burnt it, and so there's smoke all, in the back. These two men are arguing. That's a distraction. While the people are being distracted, William Bradley steps up, shoots Malcolm X with a sawed-off J.C. Higgins shotgun, and then that's when the other two men, Leon X. Davis and Talmadge Hayer, a.k.a. Thomas Hagen, a.k.a. Mujahid Abdul Halim, got up and emptied their handguns into Malcolm. The kill shot was William Bradley's. One shotgun blast, and overall, Malcolm X sustained 21 gunshot wounds, including 10 buckshot wounds from that shotgun. So 10 of the 21 shots that was lodged in Malcolm X came from that one buckshot shotgun blast. The other 11 gunshot wounds would have came from Leon X. Davis's and Talmadge Hayer's emptying of their guns. So, currently, there's a little silver lining here. The Audubon Ballroom is now home to the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Education Center. One of Malcolm's biggest legacies was to get black men to assert themselves, to be more manly, since white racist totalitarian dictatorship, this segregated bullshit, was emasculating to black men. When black men would get lynched, for some reason, the white supremacists would want to cut off the black man's balls, and probably his dick too, take them home, keep them for a souvenir. In fact, you just had recently Nat Turner, his skull popped up. This movie was made, and apparently somebody had bought his skull as a kind of collectible, and they've been holding on to it for, 50, 80 years or so. But so good for the man who, finally said that they had the skull of Nat Turner. But what the hell is this about? It makes me think that when it comes to racism, there's hatred, there's ignorance, there's fear of the other. All that contributes to racism. But it seems like a lot of racism from white supremacists comes from white jealousy of black bodies. Why was Malcolm X killed? Because of Elijah Muhammad. There was a beef between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. Here's some backdrop. So John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. And then on December 1st, about a week after he had been assassinated, they asked Malcolm X what he thought about it.
Malcolm X, you were involved in a controversy some months ago with your leader. Is that over?
Well, I've been silent for the past 90 days because of some statements I made concerning the President of the United States, which were distorted.
They were distorted?
And yes.
What did you say, Malcolm?
Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. But only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing.
Malcolm X is also right that the chickens were coming home to roost. That idea is just that essentially white America invited its own problems. So he was saying white America is sick, and then white America killed, its leader. So he was just saying that, white people had created their own problems. And, in a very general sense, he's correct on that. That's absolutely 100% correct. So if you were to believe the government that it was Lee Harvey Oswald who killed JFK, Lee Harvey Oswald is a white man. If you were to believe Oliver Stone and that it was the CIA, FBI, and all these federal agencies colluding together, well, that's also made up of white men. So Kennedy getting assassinated is white America's chickens coming home to roost. Now, I wanted to quickly break down Kennedy's legacy. JFK was only in office for 2 years, and he didn't accomplish much of anything at all. In fact, his mistakes were many and his successes were few. Kennedy is the one who is responsible for putting ground troops into Vietnam. He's the one that put American servicemen, put a gun on them and said, go out and fight. So a strong argument can be made that he's the one that started America's involvement in the Vietnam War, whereas Truman had sent military aid and equipment and, money. He didn't send any Americans into battle. That was Kennedy who did that. He did that on January 12th, 1962. That's when the first combat operation of American troops in Vietnam begins, and it was ordered by Kennedy. So the Vietnam War is Kennedy's fault. So he, not only did he start America's overt military operations in the Vietnam War, he also tripled the American dollars in military aid sent. He also sent over 3,000 military advisors that quickly ended up being 16,000 to help train local defense troops. Now, again, it was Truman who started America's involvement in Vietnam. Harry Truman refused to recognize the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Harry Truman sent $15 million to the French occupation of Vietnam in 1950. So it was Truman who started America's involvement in Vietnam, but not so much in America's involvement in the Vietnam War. He didn't put any Americans into battle. He never ordered any Americans to invade. So that was Kennedy. John F. Kennedy also helped to overthrow the South Vietnamese president Ngo Dinh Diem in 1963. So he helped to overthrow the Vietnamese leader. So you could say Truman started America's involvement in Vietnam, but he never sent ground troops. Kennedy did. He's the first one to do so. The Vietnam War is Kennedy's baby. He started the combat operation in 1962, and we'd stay in Vietnam until 1973. That's an 11 years long war. A mistake. Every single person that died in Vietnam died in vain. They died for no reason. We got nothing out of the Vietnam War. And even though it was 11 years, this was America's longest war up until the current 15-year global war for the lone superpower imperialistic domination of the entire globe that we're in right now.
Making mud houses in some sluice or some muddy pond.
Because that you think if they ever open eyes and see the truth, that they would be fools to love us. Why should we love the devil? Right. Think over that.
So JFK, he got us into Vietnam. He's the one that started America's combat operations in Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was already going on, but it wasn't until JFK ordered American troops into Vietnam before our, involvement was impacting American lives. So that wasn't the only imperialistic thing that he did. JFK also helped to overthrow Iraq's military leader in the 1963 coup d'etat. After the coup, the Ba'ath Party got into power. Who's the Ba'ath Party? That's Saddam Hussein. So he was, wiped out the dictator, Iraq's military leader, in the 1963 coup d'etat, which is the same year he's going to get killed. And then that helped to pave the path for Saddam Hussein's iron-fisted grip on Iraq for decades. Che Guevara thanked John F. Kennedy for the Bay of Pigs fiasco. This is 1961, and it's totally Kennedy's fault. There were hundreds of deaths. 118 Americans lost their lives. 176 Cubans lost theirs. Thousands of injuries. There was 1,202 American troops who were captured. They had blew up 4 B-26 bombers, sunk 2 supply ships. American bombers were taken down. And when Kennedy invaded Cuba, that showed USSR and Cuba that American imperialism in Cuba was a very real threat. It was a very real threat that America may invade Cuba. The Bay of Pigs invasion almost triggered a nuclear war. So after the Bay of Pigs, Fidel Castro comes out as an overt communist. The Bay of Pigs invasion was an attempt to stop the Cuban Revolution, but instead, it actually helped to consolidate it. The Cuban Missile Crisis is also Kennedy's fault. That also almost triggered a nuclear Armageddon. Kennedy was slow on civil rights. He didn't pass much legislation of consequence. Perhaps the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps is a really good thing that Kennedy started in the Apollo mission, getting a man on the moon. He started, that program. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. But it didn't happen until 1969, 6 years after he had been assassinated. So the pristine image of Camelot, the young, family man who spoke really well, the myth, more so than the legacy, has endured when it comes to JFK. So JFK wasn't that great, and Malcolm X was right. The chickens did come home to roost. I'm for truth no matter who tells it. I'm for justice no matter who it is for or against. I'm a human being, first and foremost, and as such, I'm for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. Malcolm X.
Very good. Which would you call your real home, Chicago or Phoenix now?
Well, either one is my real home.
Yeah.
Well, either one is my real home.
Yeah.
Well, either one is my real home.
Yeah.
Either one is my real home. And going contrary to the truth by telling other than the truth, it don't bring a person to no good end.
Became involved in any kind of sexual relationship with someone to whom they weren't married, that person would be brought before the Muslim community, humiliated, and then isolated from 1 to 5 years. This was our law. In 1955, a young teenage sister left Detroit, went to Chicago.
Hold it.
So Malcolm met with just what he preached.
You feel then possibly he was more interested in serving his own interests than a cause?
Well, I believe that he really wanted to be that which God had not made him.
Now, Lieutenant Phillips told me at this time that they had received information from an informant source that the black Muslim, somebody in the black Muslim organization, had vowed to kill Malcolm X, and that a part of this vow was concerned with killing him publicly. Why, I don't know.
So Barry Goldwater's famous quote is that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. Hillary Clinton was a Goldwater girl. Malcolm X, just like Barry Goldwater, also believed that extremism in the defense of liberty was a virtue too, and Malcolm X wasn't a moderate when it came to justice either. Extremism, Martin Luther King also said it didn't matter that if a person was an extremist or not. If you're an extremist for love, freedom, if you're an extremist for justice, if you're an extremist for good things, right? If someone's about to shoot your wife and you shoot him first, well, that's extreme, but who's going to argue with self-defense? So just being extreme doesn't mean anything, one way or another. If you're an extremist for genocide, okay, that's a bad thing. So Malcolm X, a.k.a. El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, was reprimanded in December 1963 by the unhonorable piece of shit Elijah Muhammad for his chickens coming home to roost comments about JFK's assassination. This severed an already tense relationship. He got 90 days suspension, couldn't talk to the media. So this was a beef, essentially, between a freedom fighter, on one hand, Malcolm X, and a disgusting, dirty, creepy old predator, Elijah Muhammad. So Malcolm X starts his own independent groups, and
Lieutenant Phillips didn't know at that time. Now, when we received this information, naturally we took precautions here in Chicago to safeguard his presence while he was here.
Do you feel possibly something that Malcolm brought on himself then?
Well, he did bring all of it on himself.
The media has the power to make the innocent look guilty and the guilty look innocent.
If he had stayed with us, following me, he would not have been dead today. He would have been a living man today. I believe Malcolm knew these things. But in fact about it, he being all fired for self.
He tries to go on his own merry way. Now, this wasn't the first time that Elijah and Malcolm X had irreconcilable differences. On April 27th, 1962, 7 black Muslims were shot by the LAPD, and Ronald Stokes, a Korean War veteran, was murdered, fatally shot after he had already surrendered to the police. Malcolm X was ready to put pressure on the police by working with civil rights groups, local black politicians, and religious groups, so the police would stop their slaughtering. The unhonorable piece of shit, Elijah Muhammad, said, "You don't go to war over a provocation." Now, this made Malcolm X think that Elijah Muhammad was a fake, who didn't truly care about his followers, like Ronald Stokes, who got murdered after he surrendered. But instead, Elijah just wanted to exploit his death for his own purposes. Malcolm X wanted justice right now, and Elijah just wanted to sit on his hands and pass around a second and third collection plate so he could pay off his underage concubines to keep his underage concubines silent.
And as all jealous leaders meet with some such kind of fate one day or another. And so he was all fired for going for himself, as he said.
Once Elijah and Malcolm had a falling out, then Malcolm went to the media.
Well, in 1954, a teenage sister left Detroit and became one of Mr. Muhammad's personal secretaries.
And there in the Chicago office, she became pregnant after being there for a year. And she was brought before the Muslim community and humiliated and isolated. And a year later, another secretary, this time one from Lansing, Michigan, came to Chicago. She also became pregnant. She was brought before the community and humiliated and isolated. And because the other person was never brought forth during this court session, it was concluded by all of Mr. Muhammad's followers that it was a non-Muslim who was the other party.
Malcolm X reported about the hypocrisy of Elijah, how he was having sex with underage teenage secretaries, about how Elijah was fathering children all over the place. He had 12 baby mamas. This guy.
And be fitted, qualified to ask people to accept us as their equal or to accept us as a member of their society.
Communists, what do you think of this charge? Have you an opinion on this?
I don't know anything about communists. I never was one myself.
Malcolm is the victim of his own preaching. He preached for us, and so he became the victim of it.
You do not personally feel that anyone, any member of the Brotherhood of Islam committed this crime?
No, we don't do a thing like that.
Well, we grew so rapidly until that in 1957 or 58, the secretarial staff was expanded to, I think, 8 teenage sisters.
I begin with Allah and His protection, and I will end. If Allah pleases, it's okay with me.
Huh? I mean, what a stupid bitch. And look at that stupid bitch's stupid hat. The stupid way he talks, his lackadaisical demeanor, his stupid ugly face. Fuck this guy. He's a psycho. He's one of these, Elijah Muhammad has one of those skeevy demeanors where he's got that leather phase, right? He got the leather face, and then he's got that really skeevy demeanor where I just wince at him the whole time he's talking.
Don't expect to be one, and therefore I can't say anything about another man's belief.
You know, I just scowl. He's a gross man. He's disgusting. I don't understand what he's saying. And also, it just seems ridiculous to me. This is the leader of the Black Muslim movement? This guy?
Because he's stranger to us.
So you're using the resources of your own organization in New York to try and track down who did commit the crime then?
Well, we are trying to do that, not only in New York, in New Jersey, and here. Well, that's all. It's been like that in the past.
In 1959, 6 of them disappeared. 2 of them reappeared in Philadelphia about 2 or 3 months later, and they were all right. The other 4 reappeared in 1960. All 4 of them had babies. All 4 of them had become involved with someone and become pregnant and had these children. So it was, from what I now know, when the 4 of them got back to Chicago and began to compare notes, they found that the same man had told all of them the same story and had made all of them pregnant.
We are not permitted to do a thing like that by the Quran. A hypocrite is not to be killed.
Do you feel you were in any personal danger?
Nope.
Have you heard the reports that there were members of other groups moving toward Chicago in an attempt to hurt you?
Yes, sir.
What's your reaction to that, sir?
Yeah. If such thinkings are carried into practice, are forced into practice, I think...
Stop mumbling, Elijah. Speak up.
And I've been evil spoken of, but I keep on plugging.
To progress until it becomes a complete success among our people, and if they just be let alone. While a man is trying to do well, as the old saying goes, let well do.
Huh?
Since that the teachings that I am giving to these people in the qualification of kindness, and of not only body and soul, as they go to say. It only will mean the slaughter of each other. To live together and share together whatever is here. There's about 9 white men out of as a nation, and the fundamentals of the nation that they are involved with. Scripture which we have with us in Bible and Quran.
Montgomery, all through the South. Do you feel that these incidents accomplish anything?
I don't see where they have accomplished anything but the fights that they have.
Getting people hurt.
Getting people hurt and disgraced.
If you continue to kill, you have to continue to kill. If you continue to kill, you have to continue to kill. If you continue to kill, you have to continue to kill.
I mean, as much as I believe in freedom of religion and, you know, black power, totally down with black power. And I'm not even for sure if Elijah's black. He seems yellow. So Elijah Muhammad is representing the yellow leather race. I'm not for sure. So I don't know what kind of insecure sheep would follow this shepherd, this prophet, this Messiah. Elijah is not a messenger. This Elijah cunt is just a hustler with a Quran. And in general, what kind of man would be a sycophant? What kind of man would kiss anybody's ass? Even Muhammad Ali is just sitting there just clapping up a storm.
They preach they believe in Jesus. That's all words. If they had believed in Jesus, they would believe in Muhammad.
He's the greatest, and the greatest is bowing down to another man who never kicked anybody's ass whatsoever, just brainwashed the masses with his anti-white rhetoric.
That the same man was the father of all 4 of their children and had also been the father of the children brought forth by the 2 secretaries who preceded them. So this story was kept among these sisters until 1962. 2 of them rebelled against the person who was responsible and began to tell the story all over the city of Chicago. It caused many of the Muslims in the Chicago mosque to leave and go back out in the street. They knew it, and I knew nothing about it until 1963 when Mr. Muhammad's son...
So, in spite of Elijah preaching about having children out of wedlock being an Islamic crime, and then, once it was found out that the teenage secretaries that he impregnated had a child out of wedlock, they were hypocritically disgraced by Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam. I think it's like Fruit of Islam now, or Fruit of something. But the ones that Elijah Muhammad, the next prophet, mind you, right? The one that God's talking to, impregnating these teenage secretaries, and then watching as they get humiliated and shamed for having a child out of wedlock. And then the Nation of Islam would ban them from their cult for 5 years. They would isolate them, you know, for fathering a child out of wedlock. When it was Elijah, the #1 guy, the head honcho, who fucked those girls and got them pregnant. You know, what a fucking hypocrite. I could give a shit less about, you know, the whole out of wedlock bullshit. It's the hypocrisy. The absolute hypocrisy. He's a hypocrite. He allowed the teenage secretaries to be shamed and disgraced, knowing full well that they were carrying his child. And he told them all that they were technically his wives. So he was like, no, it's cool. You can fuck me. You're actually my wife. I'm going to keep this on the down low, and it's going to look like we're all laughing and humiliating you, but really, you're my one and only. You're my wife. But he only told that to them privately, not publicly. Publicly, he allowed them to be shamed and humiliated. When Malcolm X confronted Elijah about the illegitimate children, Elijah just shrugged it off and said that Islam's prophet Muhammad had 13 wives. Well, hell, the prophet had 13 wives. Must be okay for Elijah. And then he also pointed out the Bible's dated many wives too and fathered a bunch of kids. So Elijah's own prophet who he carries the name of, not only did he have 13 wives, he was also a pedophile. Many of Elijah's followers said that Malcolm was slandering Elijah, and the best case against slander is the truth, as German-American journalist John Peter Zinger taught New York in 1734. Not slander Elijah Muhammad, because what Malcolm X was saying to the media was the truth. He told the truth, just like he did about black and white relations in America, just like he did about the war in Vietnam, just like he did about manhood in general, police brutality, the double standards of the white supremacist, hypocritical society, the hypocrisy, the Democratic Party. You know, there's a shocker, that hasn't changed. And always fighting for the freedom for the oppressed, to liberate the oppressed. Malcolm X told the truth. He told the truth. It's not slander. And Elijah had 12 baby mamas. 12 baby mamas. And I'm not for sure what the ages of these underage secretaries were. There's no telling. So Elijah had 12 baby mamas. 12 baby mamas.
Two of the sisters had 2 children by the same man. And one of those 2 sisters was pregnant still, getting ready to have a 3rd child by the same man. So when it was known among the Chicago officials that I had a knowledge of this, they become very fearful of me. They became very antagonistic toward me, and they had to do something to diminish the authority that I had, for fear that if this became public knowledge, the followers would leave the Muslim movement and follow me. And it was at that time that they used the statement that I made against President Kennedy as a pretext to cut my authority, and some other things happened that finally produced the split, or forced the split. And when I made the split, the only reason that I didn't make this public knowledge was I knew the implications, and I felt that if the Muslims who were in the Nation of Islam knew it, that which enabled them to be so strongly religious and exercise moral discipline would be shattered, and it would cause all of them to go right back and start doing the things that they had been doing previously.
Who is the father of all of these various children whom you have enumerated?
The first one to tell me who the father was Wallace Muhammad, and he told me that the father was Elijah Muhammad himself. One of the sisters, he went to the home of one of the sisters, and when he walked in the door, she says, "I want to let you see something." And she showed him her child. She said, "Here's your brother, and your father is the father of this child." And then I questioned the sisters myself, because I was shook up. And they admitted to me that Elijah Muhammad was the father of their children. And I took it to him. And it was at that time he told me that he was Muhammad, the prophet, and that Muhammad had 9 wives. He also told me that he was David. He was the modern David, and that he was the modern Solomon, and that it was meant for him to fulfill today all of the things that they did back there.
And how many of these illegitimate children did he father with the sisters?
Well, he made 6 sisters pregnant. They all had children. 2 of those 6 had 2 children. One of those 2 is having a child right now. I am told that there is a 7th sister who is supposed to be in Mexico right now, and she's supposed to be having a child by him.
Have you ever just been in awe of somebody's bullshit? I mean, how in the world did this douchebag build the entire Nation of Islam empire? How did he build that empire? This douchebag?
As others, and that's banish all argument, dissatisfaction, disagreement. If he had stayed with us, following me, he would not have been dead today. He would have been a living man today. I believe Malcolm and the evil thinkings of nations, and that they was cut off from their thought. I think that is very true.
Evelyn X. Williams was one of Elijah's sexual conquests, and she said that Elijah informed her that under the teaching of the Holy Quran, they weren't being adulterous because they were one of his many wives. So he's saying this again. Evelyn X. and another Elijah Scum dumpster filed a paternity suit against Elijah. And they also had to endure the harassment, and a bomb went off in their shared living quarters. Evelyn's first child was born in 1960, and she wanted more than $300 a month in child support. Elijah Muhammad snaps back saying, "You think I'm a for Santa Claus? Am I a for Santa Claus?" So that's how, he's paying these women, girls, off to the side to keep them quiet, paying for the child support. overall, 13 out of Elijah's 21 children were out of wedlock. 13 out of Elijah's 21 children were out of wedlock. So he did have 8 kids with one woman. But overall, he had 12 baby mamas. 12 baby mamas. 12 baby mamas. 12. Not this many, but this many, plus this one, and then this one. I mean, personally, out of wedlock don't mean shit to me. It's the hypocrisy that I can't stand. And then he's stealing the women, right? Only one man gets it all, and then all the rest, nothing. This is polygamy. This is like the Mormons. He wants too much. He wants too much. Many of his followers could have used a good wife. But instead, Elijah went ahead and tainted him all with his, disgusting old wrinkled balls. He's 65-something years old, Gross. He tainted them with his taint. So to the followers of Elijah Muhammad, gross. Ew. You guys are nasty. You guys are nasty. You can't see through his bullshit. Elijah Muhammad reminds me of some of the voodoo priests in Haiti. And the voodoo priests in Haiti, they would get, all their congregation around, and they're going to feed the Loa. They're going to feed all these different ghosts that are in the air. And the way that you got to feed the Loa is you got to sit there and take everybody's cigarettes and their, marijuana and whatever drugs they have, drink all their liquor, make out with all their women, just go through this little crazy spell. And everybody's just supposed to watch this this asshole just go, hog wild. And he's doing weird stuff, spitting things in a different way. And it's a show, so it's very, it could be entertaining. But it's clearly bullshit. He just wants to get drunk and make out with your women. Talking to ghosts, and why would you believe that? So the reason why I think Elijah Muhammad is guilty of giving the order to assassinate Malcolm X. If you just listen to what Malcolm X was saying, he was saying that as early as 1963, a member of the Seventh Temple confessed to him that he had received orders from the Nation of Islam to kill him. So for, 2 years prior to his assassination, there was already orders that were being, handed down. Malcolm X himself actually said that he would have wanted to have killed himself if he was one of the brainwashed members, if he would have been the same person he was a few years ago when he started speaking out about Elijah. So he knew, that he would have been wanting to kill the new Malcolm, the Great Awakening, after Malcolm received his Great Awakening, and he even once said that it didn't matter what religion that you were a part of. So he understood the climate within the Nation of Islam, and since Elijah was propelled to be this great man, this Messiah, this saint, he wasn't at all, but Malcolm X was breaking the spell of millions of deluded sycophants. And then overall, Elijah just has this slimy, skeevish creepiness feel to me. History proves that the white man is a devil. And if you look at Elijah, just look at him. He's clearly jealous of Malcolm's media skills and charisma and charm and looks. Malcolm X was everything. Elijah wasn't. Malcolm had too much power, that natural, pure, reverent power, one that inspires people to action instead of that totalitarian dictator, oppressive power that's exploitative and destructive to the soul of the people. Of course, Elijah was jealous of Malcolm X's power, and once Elijah lost control of him, he needed to be gotten rid of. All 5 of X's assassins were black Muslims from the Nation of Islam, Mosque number 25. All of them. So I think Elijah ordered the hit personally, but without evidence, so that's just speculation. Elijah getting Malcolm X killed feels very much like how Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon got Salvador Allende in Chile assassinated. They meddled in Chile's affairs for years, giving the opposition money, but then once it happened, they were far from it, they were far from it enough so their deniability was plausible. If you're, stupid, if you can't see through the smoke screen. Nixon liked to say, well, just keep it out of my office. Yeah, go ahead, get him assassinated, but keep it out of my office. Meaning, if it comes out that they found out you were connected to me and we were a part of this, then you're going to fall on the sword, and I'm going to pretend like I had nothing to do with it. It was your fault. And so that's essentially keep it out of my office, meaning go ahead and do some corrupt shit. If you get caught, then you'll go down with it. You'll get thrown under the bus, but it's okay if you go ahead and do it. So that's actually being generous to Elijah. And then just listen to what Elijah said after Malcolm X was killed. Just listen to him.
If you continue to kill, you have to continue to kill. Malcolm is the victim of his own preaching. He preached for it, and so he became the victim of it.
You do not personally feel that any member of the Brotherhood of Islam committed this crime?
No. We don't do a thing like that. If you continue to kill, you have to continue to kill.
Do you feel possibly something that Malcolm brought on himself then?
Well, he did bring all of it on himself. If he had stayed with us, following me, he would not have been dead today. He would have been a living man today.
History proves that the white man is a devil. I feel like Elijah basically just told on himself. He said that Malcolm was a victim of his own preaching, which is what Malcolm X said that the media was going to say that he was, a preacher of hate. Now Elijah is saying that, but Elijah is saying that for himself. He's saying, he was preaching hatred towards me. So that's why he was a victim of his own preaching. He was preaching hate towards me, so then I made him a victim of his own preaching. So Malcolm X was preaching that Elijah is fucking all those teenage girls and knocking them up, and then he was pretending like he wasn't doing that, and Elijah wanted to make Malcolm a victim of that preaching. Elijah Muhammad also said that Malcolm X's assassination was the work of God. It's the work of God. God did this.
Do it in account with any serious trouble from Malcolm's death. This death of Malcolm, God himself had something to do with that. And I think the people will learn that this was some work of God himself.
And he's paternalistic. Elijah's paternalistic. He said if Malcolm would have just been a good boy, so Elijah was essentially saying if Malcolm would have just been a good boy, he could have made it far with Elijah's cult, but instead Malcolm was a victim of his own preaching. He brought it all on himself. X was being murdered. X being murdered to Elijah was divine intervention. And he's, got a personal one-on-one relationship with God. So it wasn't just unnecessary bloodshed. It was divine bloodshed for Elijah. So it's weird how Elijah says that it's God's work with Malcolm X being murdered. But he didn't have shit to say when Ronald Stokes was killed. He said, let's not go to war. A provocation is no reason to go to war. Overall, Elijah Muhammad had 8 children with his wife Clara. Elijah also had 3 children with Lucille Rosary Muhammad, 1 child with Evelyn Muhammad, and 4 children with Tanetta Muhammad, and he's fathered other children from other relationships. In all, it's estimated that the disgusting, lowlife, and dishonorable, degenerate Elijah Muhammad has had 21 children, most of them out of wedlock, in direct contradiction with his own Quran and Muslim teachings. Then Malcolm X went to Mecca, saw a different light. He wasn't so exclusive, and he believed in humankind. I even heard Malcolm X say he didn't care what religion you were a part of. 9 baby mamas, though? 9? Maybe 10, 11, I don't know. Nobody can keep track of this guy. 2 days before Malcolm X was killed, he told a reporter that a threat was out on his life. Malcolm X felt like he had actually died 20 years ago. And so he was prepared to die for his cause, to die a martyr. And that's why he felt no fear. He wasn't afraid of anybody or anything because he had accepted that by fighting for freedom, he was going to be a dead man already. The threat on his life was in fulfillment of the prophecy. So I put Malcolm X's body right at the feet of Elijah Muhammad. Elijah could kiss my ass. Elijah Muhammad's superstitious, tyrannical, hypocritical, disloyal, selfish, narcissist, cheating, lying, fraudulent, rapist, oppressor of women, underage women. No telling how young these underage girls were who were his secretaries and who were getting pregnant. So apparently they were old enough to have children, right? Or at least the ones that got pregnant were. He's an oppressor, molester. He's a disgusting, he's no person to idolize and put on a pedestal and, you know, deify as if he is, he's not Jesus, come on. Elijah Muhammad was born Elijah Robert Poole in Sandersville, Georgia in 1897. He died when he was 77 years old. In 1975 and 1965, he was a 67-year-old man. 67 years old. All them nasty, you know, that nasty, wrinkled, disgusting balls on all the, you know, beautiful young women, right? He tainted them all with his disgusting, creepy, dirty old manness, with his predatory tactics on unsuspecting underage girls. Where'd they come from? Why are they in these chairs? Why are they secretaries for him? And then you're telling me nobody in the office knew that this was going on? Somebody had to have been paying attention. So death is the great neutralizer. Death takes away good men, unfortunately. But they also take away the bad men, like Elijah Muhammad. Eventually, Elijah Muhammad, when he's 77 years old in 1975, 10 years after Malcolm X had been killed, he's going to die from organ failure. Heart failure stemming from heart disease, diabetes, bronchitis, asthma. So that's how he died. Organ failure. Heart failure, heart disease, diabetes, bronchitis, and asthma. So not even the wicked can escape death. So I got two more sections. First, I'm going to talk about the government agents who were following Malcolm, who were very much a part of this. And then the fate of all 5 of Malcolm X's 5 assassins. What happened to them all? There was 5. What happened to Malcolm X's 5 assassins? Coming up. Okay.
What happened to the prophets that came to you and your people? From Moses until today. What happened to them? According to your own history. You beat them. You disgraced them. And some you persecuted, put in prison houses, and some you killed. You are the people that is guilty of killing and taking the lives of the prophets of God in the past. I'm the last one. Yes, sir. And you desire to take my life. Yes. But I say you will not harm even so much a hair on my head unless it's the will of Allah.
Scripture which we have with us in Bible and Quran, I think, excuse me, I think we are at a time.
In the past, the greatest weapon the white man has had has been his ability to divide and conquer. If I take my hand and slap you, you don't feel it. It may sting you because these digits are separated. But all I have to do to put you back in your place is to bring these digits together.
If he had stayed with us, following me, he would not have been dead today. He would have been a living man today.
If ballots don't work, bullets will.
I believe, Malcolm, just that. I don't think we should use the word that do you think, but I have examples. Excuse me, for the world. And these men that follow me and women,
some of my own brothers sought to take my life, plan my death. But I have never told one to come after you with evil.
Scripture which we have with us in Bible and Quran, I think.
The white man made the mistake of letting me read his history books. He made the mistake of teaching me that Patrick Henry was a patriot. And George Washington. Wasn't nothing non-violent about old Pat or George Washington.
If we look at that prophesy.
But you help him anyway. She said, it ain't nothing but jealousy. She said, it ain't nothing but jealousy, 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 jealousy.
My alma mater was books, a good library. I could spend the rest of my life reading, just satisfying my curiosity.
Help my husband. And look at the word. Elijah Muhammad was not jealous of me or Malcolm. You can't be a jealous person or an envious person and have the Spirit of God in you.
This is kind of the war season to become.
I don't even call it violence when it's in self-defense. I call it intelligence.
Some of us knew.
Have you received threats on your life?
Oh, yes.
What do you mean?
When you understand the makeup of the Muslim movement and the psychology of the Muslim movement, as long as if I myself, by having confidence in the leader of the Muslim movement, if someone came to me and I had no knowledge whatsoever of what had taken place, and they told me what I'm saying, I would kill them myself. The only thing that would prevent me from killing someone who made a statement like this, they would have to be able to let me know that it's true. Now, if anyone had come to me other than Mr. Muhammad's son, I never would have believed it, even enough to look into it. But I had been around him so closely, I had seen indications of the reality of it, but my religious sincerity made me block it out of my mind.
History proves that the white man is a devil.
We have information that several members of Malcolm X, the organization to which Malcolm X belongs, have planned to journey to Chicago to take retaliatory measures.
Is this information from New York police?
From New York police and from other sources as well.
And you don't hear me on the radio condemning Imam Warithuddin. You don't hear me on the radio speaking against those who speak against me. Let them say what they want. My work is clear. I'm a strong piece of board in the corner of the building, upholding the weight not of the tiny nation, but of 30 million or more black people in America.
Scripture which we have with us in Bible and Quran, I think, excuse me, I think we are at a time, that's the only thing that I can see in such movements as going, marching on people and trying to force yourself. The base of it is forcing yourself on people that you're not wanted.
God has made me a better man for you than Malcolm X. I'm standing where Malcolm would have stood if he had the character to stand where I'm standing.
I think we should qualify for such place first. That means cleaning up ourselves internally and externally as well. And in such way that no one would accept you in that way of forcing or even appealing for. I think
both John Ali and Gene Roberts were both well-documented undercover agents who had infiltrated Malcolm X's group. Brother Gene is what he was affectionately known as. Even Malcolm X called him Brother Gene. Brother Gene Roberts was an undercover New York Police Department officer, part of the Bureau of Special Services, the BOSS division, the Boss division. And they worked in conjunction with the FBI. And Brother Gene, surprisingly, was Malcolm X's chief, one of his chiefs of security. So this is a very high-level infiltration. So he's a NYPD officer who also worked in conjunction with the FBI, and he was Malcolm X's chiefs of security, one of them. Now, Brother Gene Roberts was right there at the scene of the assassination of Malcolm X. He was in the middle of the melee getting shot or shooting at somebody, something, I don't know. But the famous picture where it looks like Gene Roberts is giving Malcolm X mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. There's a famous picture where it looks like Gene Roberts is giving Malcolm X mouth-to-mouth resuscitation when he is bloodied on the ground. February 21st, 1965, in the Audubon Ballroom. In the Audubon Ballroom. Some speculate, however, that perhaps Gene Roberts wasn't trying to revive Malcolm, but he was actually checking Malcolm's vitals in order to get a solid confirmation on the kill. Malcolm X affectionately called Gene Roberts Brother Gene. Joan Roberts, Brother Gene Roberts' wife, actually grabbed Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's wife, who was also a doctor. Joan Roberts was preventing Betty Shabazz from getting to Malcolm as he lay on the ground bleeding and dying until Betty Shabazz threw Joan Roberts into the wall and escaped from Joan Roberts' grip. Then she was able to get to her dying husband. She's a doctor trying to get to her dying husband, and Joan Roberts stops her. Gene Roberts went on to become a disruptive force in the Black Panther. Now, John Ali was straight up an FBI informant. John Ali sowed seeds of dissent between Malcolm X and Elijah, which is precisely what J. Edgar Hoover wanted him and all the FBI to do. On June 5th, 1964, Hoover sent a telegram to the FBI's New York office that simply and plainly instructed, do something about Malcolm X. Enough of this black violence in New York. Do something about Malcolm X. J. Edgar Hoover orders the FBI's New York office. This is 1 year prior to his assassination. J. Edgar Hoover wanted to stop the rise of a black messiah. He was afraid that a black messiah could rise up and unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. And he thought that Malcolm X could be such a messiah. An FBI document says that John X. Ali met with Talmadge Hayer, one of the 5 assassins of Malcolm X, the night before his assassination. John X. Ali would get pissed off because Malcolm X was trying to duck him the day of the assassination. But John Ali insisted that he was trying to protect Malcolm X. He wasn't, but he was sitting there saying, I'm trying to protect you. Why are you trying to duck me?
Brother Thomas 15X, you were a lieutenant in the Fruit of Islam. And the Fruit of Islam is the paramilitary unit of the Nation of Islam.
Exactly.
Now, you said that you did deny, I've read this and many things, that you did have a meeting.
Right.
Was this the night before or the day before Malcolm was killed? Couple days. Was this at the New York Hilton Hotel?
No, we was at, matter of fact, I escorted him to the hotel, and he ducked me. I lost him some kind of way, and I got suspicious of that because I'm there to secure you. Why are you ducking me?
John X. Ali, an FBI agent who infiltrated the highest level of the Nation of Islam. He was the national secretary. Stalin started out by being the general secretary. So John X. Ali became the Nation of Islam's national secretary. And he could provide the floor plan since he was living with Malcolm X at the time. And he lived with Malcolm X for about 3 to 4 years.
Well, you know, there have been rumors that you was a double agent working for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. Did you want to comment on that?
Well, I was no agent for the FBI or any other entity of the United States, the Boy Scouts, the church, the Rotary Club, or any entity. They all were the same to the messenger. He didn't view one.
But we had that on 119th Street. We had a news office, Muhammad Speaks.
And who was at this meeting?
All the lieutenants.
How many lieutenants were there?
It was, I wouldn't say all, there was...
John X. Ali also played a part in the firebombing of Malcolm X's house 1 week prior to his assassination. This is the FBI. Double agent for the FBI. Firebombing Malcolm X's house after getting the order from J. Edgar Hoover to do something about Malcolm X. firebombed his house 1 week prior to the assassination. John X. Ali is one dirty, rotten, two-faced son of a bitch. Supposedly, this is a report that's floating out there, National Secretary John Ali, by the orders of Elijah Muhammad Jr., is actually the man who assembled the 10-man special team codenamed Task Force FARD, comprising of Nation of Islam soldiers from the New Jersey Mosque 25 and New York Mosque number 7, which carried out the February 21st, 1965 assassination of Malcolm X. John Ali is a bad guy. He's a bad dude. FBI. So the FBI was a part of the Nation of Islam. Talked to the assassin right beforehand. The NYPD was right there on the scene, undercover, supposedly resuscitating or making sure the kill shot was, good. There's another name, Ray Woods. His name was mentioned. There was 2 people who was arrested that day, but the second person the name was never mentioned or released to the public. And somebody believes that it could have been, or they saw their name, Raymond Wood. And Raymond Wood is also an undercover New York Police Department. It says Bossy. I don't know if it's different. Bureau of Special Services and Investigation. So it's not just the Boss Division, but the Bossy Division. And his name has been floated as the other man that was arrested that day. So Ray Wood and Gene Roberts' records have not been released by the NYPD or the FBI. So we don't know any of what these 2 people have, what Gene Roberts and Ray Wood has accomplished. What is Raymond A. Wood and Gene Roberts? What would their career tell us? What could we learn from their notes and records? Malcolm X personally believed that the CIA nearly killed him by poisoning him in Cairo, Egypt in late July 1964. Malcolm said CIA agents had always made their presence known when he traveled abroad as a way to intimidate him. So that it was, as broad as daylight. They would just just follow Malcolm at wherever he went. In a Cairo restaurant, Malcolm felt the poison in his food in his mouth. And then he realized that the waiter was somebody he knew from New York. So he recognized the person. Thought it was more than just a coincidence and started tasting the poison. They were able to get Malcolm X to the hospital and get his stomach pumped, and he was barely saved. The doctor there verified that Malcolm X had indeed been poisoned. Now, the last sort of major question I'm going to ask about his assassination when it comes to the government authorities is, where's the police coverage? So Malcolm X is a prominent figure. Typically, the police would be present at one of his events. And the Chicago police always provided protection for him.
Lieutenant Phillips didn't know at that time. Now, when we received this information, naturally, we took precautions here in Chicago to safeguard his presence while he was here.
And even if it wasn't to provide protection for him, maybe to keep the, his followers from getting out of control. Perhaps that's another reason for the police to be at Malcolm X's event. Detroit Red's house had just been firebombed 1 month before. His baby girls were nearly killed. Threats had already been made against Malcolm X. An assassination attempt was very possible. But yet, on February 21st, not one officer was stationed at the entrance to the Audubon Ballroom where the meeting took place. And while there were 2 uniformed officers inside the building, they remained in a smaller room at a distance from the main event area, only for a small period of time. They would later move to the hospital across the street. The NYPD still has documents they haven't released pertaining to Malcolm's assassination. So New York needs to release all of their documents. So does the FBI. The FBI has 20,000 pages of files about Malcolm X, and they wanted to directly monitor and disrupt him, right? Do something about Malcolm X, J. Edgar Hoover says to his New York office. They have the blood of Fred Hampton on their hands too, the FBI does. Conspiracy is supposed to be a cuss word, but it shouldn't be. People conspire all the time. Anytime people get together and make a collective decision, hey, let's go out to the bar. Hey, let's start a little league team. Hey, let's start a bank. Hey, parents conspire on their children. Children conspire to duck their parents. Teachers, administrators, principals, and school meetings conspire with their curriculum, right? against the students. Cops conspire against the public. So do corporations. Corporations conspire on how to get as much of the public's money as they can. People are always conspiring. They are always conspiring all the time about anything and anybody in all different directions. And the assassination of Malcolm X was definitely a conspiracy because a group of men got together, they crowded around together, and they conspired to murder Malcolm X. That was a conspiracy. So we know that there's at least 5 men who's a part of this conspiracy. William Willie X. Bradley, Leon X. Davis, Talmadge Hayer, Wilbur McKinley, and Albert Benjamin Thomas. Those are the 5 people that was a part of this conspiracy. All 5 of them, there was 1 with a shotgun, 2 with handguns, 2 diverting. And so between those 5 men, they all conspired to assassinate Malcolm X that night. John X. Ali met with the shooters the night before X was killed. So he could probably be included in that list of responsible parties as well. So you got 6 men. So at least 6 members of the Nation of Islam conspired to kill Malcolm X. Now the question is, who else is a part of the conspiracy? Who else is a part of this conspiring to kill Malcolm X? Who else is a part of that conversation? There's a lot of people that it could be. At the end of Malcolm's life, he had developed a broad internationalist vision of emancipatory power, far better than any other single individual had at that point. Malcolm came out against the Vietnam War in 1964. The FBI was afraid he was going to become a black messiah. That's why they enlisted John X. Ali to infiltrate him. The CIA followed Malcolm around overtly wherever he went as he flew abroad. And the NYPD didn't provide protection for Malcolm on that day. They had an undercover in Malcolm's group as a chief of security. So it's not just a bunch of random coincidences. At the very most, the NYPD, FBI, and CIA were involved in the conspiring, the plotting, and at the very least, the assassination converged upon their self-interest. So they just turned their heads. So that's my take on the government being involved in Malcolm X's assassination. 4 out of the 5 Malcolm X assassins got away scot-free. So you actually even had Willie X. Bradley, a.k.a. Al-Mustafa Shabazz, in jail when Talmadge Hayer, who signed his 1977 affidavit fingering Willie X. Bradley, a.k.a. Al-Mustafa Shabazz, as the triggerman, and the others involved, hoping to exonerate Thomas 15X Johnson and Norman 3X Butler, since Talmadge knew that they didn't do it. So the authorities ignored this new piece of vital information, and they didn't go after anybody. There's an affidavit. They could have reinvestigated the case. They could have reopened the case. History proves that the white man is a devil.
Malcolm is the victim of his own preaching. He preached violence, and so he becomes the victim of it.
You do not personally feel that anyone, any member of the Brotherhood of Islam committed this crime?
No, we don't do a thing like that.
But instead of reopening the case and not even talking to William Bradley when he was sitting in jail at that time, Talmadge Hayer, Thomas Hagen, a.k.a. the same guy, Thomas Hagen, Talmadge Hayer, and then he's got a Muslim name now. He was convicted. That's the man that the crowd had caught and beat up, and that was the one man they were able to arrest. He was convicted in the 1966 trial, but so were 2 other men, Thomas 15X Johnson, a.k.a. Khalil Islam, and Norman 3X Butler, a.k.a. Muhammad Abd al-Aziz. Okay, ABD. So, Norman 3X and Thomas 15X. Thomas 15X Johnson, a.k.a. Khalil Islam, and Norman 3X Butler, a.k.a. Muhammad Abd al-Aziz, were wrongly convicted for Malcolm's assassination. All 3 of those guys, Talmadge Hayer and Thomas 15X and Norman 3X, received 20 years to life sentences. Norman 3X Butler was eventually paroled in 1985, 19 years after he'd been behind bars for 19 years. Thomas 15X Johnson was paroled in 1987, 21 years after he had been behind bars. So they both essentially fulfilled their 20-year sentences. He was after Norman 3X Butler, a.k.a. Muhammad Abdul Aziz. Okay. So Muhammad Abdul Aziz, who's Norman 3X Butler, he was paroled in 1985 after he was behind bars for 19 years. Then he becomes the head of Harlem's Mosque in 1998. So 13 years later, is he rewarded for the time he spent for taking, the sentence of the guilty parties? Is that why he got it? Or maybe because he was a part of the thing? That's always still a possibility too. But I believe Marable Manning on this. Thomas 15X Johnson, he changed his name to Khalil Islam. He was released in 1987, and he maintained his innocence until his death in August 2009. So, Thomas 15X is dead. So since Talmadge Hayer, Thomas Hagen, felt responsible for Thomas 15X and Norman 3X going to jail, since he refused to name anybody who conspired against him, he eventually signed an affidavit in 1977. So when they said in the 1966 trial, so did these two men help you kill Malcolm X? And he said no. They said, well, who did? He's like, I'm not going to say. And so he felt like he was responsible for why those two men had got convicted. So he signs an affidavit, and he says it wasn't those two men. He said it was these other men. Here are the 5 people who assassinated Malcolm X. William Willie X. Bradley, a.k.a. Al-Mustafa Shabazz. Leon X. Davis. Talmadge Hayer, of course, which we already know, who now goes by Mujahid Abdul Halim. Wilbur McKinley. And Albert Benjamin Thomas. So he, instead of keeping his tongue, quiet, he went ahead and pointed out to 4 other guys, and he said them by name and said that they were the responsible parties, and it wasn't the 2 people behind bars. While Talmadge Hayer was behind bars, he was behind bars for 45 years. He earned a bachelor's and master's degree. He filed 16 times for parole, denied each time, but in 1988, he was allowed to participate in a work release program where he could work outside the prison, and it required him to only spend 2 days a week in a minimum security facility in Manhattan. The rest of the week, he was allowed to stay with his wife and children. So essentially, in 1988, he got out. Then he did some other things, the counselor, the homeless shelter at Ward's Island fast food restaurant. He worked in Crown Heights Youth Collective. March 2010, you had Hagen, Thomas Hagen, Talmadge Hayer, was released. He was finally granted parole and was released from prison at the end of April. He is still a practicing Muslim. And he's left the Nation of Islam, no longer agreeing with their ideology, and he has expressed regret for having shot Malcolm X. He's the only one that actually who got punished for the crime, the horrible crime of Malcolm X's death. So out of Malcolm X's 5 assassins, only Talmadge Hayer paid for his crime. 2 of the others may be dead, which means at the very least that 2 of Malcolm X's assassins still live on. And at the most, 4 of them do, without ever being punished or receiving any consequences whatsoever when there's no statute of limitations on murder. William Willie X. Bradley, still living in Newark, New Jersey. In 1989, Leon X. Davis was reported to be living in Paterson, New Jersey. Wilbur McKinley, very little is known about him. One researcher thinks he's dead. Albert Benjamin Thomas was supposedly killed by a .44 caliber pistol, point blank range in a domestic dispute in Florida in 1986. Or maybe that's just some bullshit to keep his enemies at bay. The same could be said about Wilbur McKinley. 4 of the 5 of Malcolm X's assassins got away scot-free for their bloodshed, for ending the life of the great prince. Could you imagine if we as a society knew that 4 of JFK's assassins who got away scot-free with their assassination and still did nothing about it? That would kind of seem insane, wouldn't it? Didn't Lincoln, even the bartender who listened to Lincoln's conspirators, got hung? And there's no statute of limitations on murder.
A man that you know very well, I won't call his name, robbed the nation when we were poor of $25,000 because we were trying to get back the old home of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the mosque. And he said he could deliver. He needed $25,000.
For such thing to happen, it is disgrace.
I think most people would agree with that. Don't you find that so, that most people would share that view at least?
I think all civilized men will.
The problems in America over the past few years have resulted in things like the problems in Selma, Alabama.
He was a friend of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, so he said, but he took our money. And the brothers were so angry they wanted to take his head. I said, leave him alone. I've been slandered by my own brothers.
If you said that you were involved at that time, you also said at that time that these two brothers were not involved, but they didn't believe you then. What is the difference in the information you're bringing forth now that would convince someone that you're now giving a more accurate story?
Well, at the time, I had stated on the witness stand that the brothers was not involved, but I was asked to give names of the individuals who was involved in the case with me. And at that time, I didn't give the names of the other brothers that took part in the assassination or the killing of Malcolm X. I didn't give the names. And because I didn't give the names, it was felt that, well, perhaps I was just trying to free the other brothers. I was trying to take the weight myself and protect them. And this seems to have been the feelings at that time. You know, this is the way that things was going. But I couldn't, at the time, there was a lot of things involved. You know, I really didn't feel that I could state names. I had to disassociate myself from the Nation of Islam at the time. I said that I wasn't a Muslim. Things like this, of course, I was trying to protect the Nation of Islam at the time. I didn't want to, like, draw the nation into it on my part. So I was really trying to protect the nation, right? But it got to a point, originally when the trial first started, I actually felt that the brothers would be cut loose. I didn't think that they was going to be convicted until this trial started going on, and it became obvious what was being done. And at that point, you know, I had to say something. And this is when I said what I said, that they were not involved.
Known in the black Muslim community of Newark, New Jersey for 45 years. The man in this freeze frame with his back to the camera is shotgun assassin William Bradley.
I could see then that there are many white people in this country who will side with the Negro in whatever he has to do to protect himself.
You have changed your attitude about the white man in the United States to some extent.
Well, I've broadened my scope. Travel broadens your scope. It gives you a wider understanding. And I have, in my many lectures on college campuses, seen many whites, even as a black Muslim, whose reaction to much of what I had to say showed me that they were genuinely concerned. Some weren't genuinely concerned, but many of them were. And this element is increasing.
But that's a considerable change of opinion in Malcolm X.
No, today I'm speaking for myself. Formerly I spoke for Elijah Muhammad. And everything I said was, Elijah Muhammad teaches us thus and so. I'm speaking now from what I think, from what I have seen, from what I have analyzed, and the conclusions that I have reached.
And the white man is no longer the devil, and he is no longer bound to be evil.
The Holy Quran teaches us to judge a man by his conscious behavior, by his intention. And my reason for going to Mecca was to get a better understanding of the religion of Islam and what the Quran teaches. So I judge a man by his conscious behavior. I am not a racist. I don't subscribe to any of the tenets of racism.
Then there are good whites and good blacks and bad whites and blacks.
It's not a case of being good and bad, good or bad blacks and whites. It's a case of being good or bad human beings.
Well, where does your financing come from now?
Right now, I have no financing. The only financing we have are the Muslims who are still with me.
You have to expect the Negroes to rise up sooner or later.
Oh, yes.
What does that mean?
Well, just the same thing that it meant in South Vietnam and these other places where you find oppressed people. Sooner or later, they rise up against the oppressor. When the Jews were being brutalized in Poland, there came a time when they couldn't take it anymore, and they fought back. They didn't have too much to fight with, but they fought back. And I think every oppressed people, no matter how meek and humble they are, after you drive them so far, they're going to strike back.
Well, does that mean that you expect to organize battalions or paramilitary units in various Negro ghettos around the country and establish this coming summer for violent action?
No, but I think that most Afro-Americans, so-called Negroes, have reached the point of no return and are taking it upon themselves to be prepared if the necessity ever arrives where they will have to do something to defend themselves.
Well, I guess they did make an effort, yes.
Did they offer you a bodyguard or anything like that?
No.
Do you want police protection?
Were you aware that she made Malcolm X made application for a gun permit as late as last Thursday?
Did he ever get the gun that he made application?
Well, how do you support yourself, Malcolm?
Well, I'm unsupported.
Well, you seem to be fairly well fed and well.
Fortunately, while I was among the Muslims, I never lived beyond my means, and I have learned how to live within means. And I still have the clothes that that was provided for me at that time. I'm in the house that was provided for me, although we're in a court battle, they're trying to get it back. And I have made this statement to them concerning the house that they could have it. If they would take me back, if they would permit me to come before the Muslim movement, the rank and file, and explain or defend myself against all of the charges that they've made against me, they could have the house. But they are going contrary to their own laws by standing up in the mosque and indicting me, but never giving me a chance to defend myself. And they say that no one can judge me but Mr. Muhammad. In this case, Mr. Muhammad can't sit as judge because he's involved in the case.
Excuse me. I think we are at a time to Ezekiel and the Bible of the dry bone which represents our people as we are. It said the hopes was lost.
Within themselves or among themselves?
Within and among themselves, I don't think it's necessary. If we would do just a bit.
And I had stated in a newspaper article about an effort to take my life back in January, and at that time the Muslims denied it. In fact, they tried to make it appear to my brother that I was insane. But on a program in Chicago called Hotline, that's moderated by Wesley South, John Ali, the national secretary, admitted, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, one of these days last week, that they absolutely were going to kill me.
You get out of the...
I'm on the phone with John Ali, former secretary, national secretary for the Nation of Islam under the leadership of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Of justice. And just say, you are justified to live in the sun here somewhere on the earth, and I will help you to try to get a place somewhere where you can live in this sun.
It's not a case of becoming a leader of a violent group. I don't think any group, even that's ready, wants violence. It's a case of...
Is this not, Minister Malcolm, a call to action of sorts that you are raising here and now?
I don't have to raise a call to action. And this is what I'm trying to make white people see. They have lost their ability to be objective where the race problem is concerned, primarily because they know that no real meaningful results have come from the Negro struggle. And in defense of this, they always call it or label it violence.
You really believe that any meaningful result is going to come from violence?
It's not a case of violence. I think that, see, if you could get away from looking at it as violence.
As others, and that's banish all argument dissatisfaction, disagreement. If he had stayed with us, following me, he would not have been dead today. He would have been a living man today. I believe Malcolm and the evil thinkings of nations, and that they was cut off from their part. I think that is very